Welcome to the Gay Buddhist Forum, where teachers from all schools of Buddhism offer their perspectives on the Dharma and its application in modern times, especially for LGBTQI audiences. These talks are offered freely to the world and made possible by appreciative listeners. If you would like to support our efforts to share the Dharma with underserved audiences, please visit gaybuddhist.org. There you can donate, find a list of upcoming speakers, or enjoy many hundreds of these recorded talks dating back to 1996.
Welcome back. Now is the time we go around the room and introduce ourselves. My name is Jay Corbett.
My name is John.
My name is Andre. I'm Peter.
Hi, I'm Bruce.
I'm Errol.
Tom.
Michael.
Jerry.
Bill.
Marvin.
Ed.
Tom.
Jack.
Esmeralda.
Harley.
Jim.
Peter.
My name is Ray Dyer.
Richard.
David.
I'm Clint.
David Axel.
Jerry Jones.
Bob
Anthony.
Mark. Top one.
Mark.
Jim Winters.
John.
Roy.
George.
Reggie.
Howard DePort.
Mike.
Philip.
Bo. David Lewis.
Anyone else? Anyone here for the first or second time?
And I'm Tom.
Oh,
My second time.
welcome.
Second time.
Please be welcoming to our newcomers. We will now have our Dharma talk by our own Tom Bruein. Tom has been a long admirer of the Dharma and began studying Buddhism in earnest in 2005. He's a certified clinical hypnotherapist and was especially drawn to the Dharma's approach to understanding and calming the ego. Recognizing the risk of substituting one form of attachment in the material world for another, like spiritual accomplishment, Tom is going to give us a talk on the trap of spiritual materialism. Take it away, Tom.
Thank you, Jay. It's so nice to be here. I always notice that when I sit and meditate in this group, it has a distinct quality as opposed to when I sit alone. So I always like doing that. And in spite of the cold, wet weather, I thought, the room would not be quite so full, but everyone seems to be here, so this is great. In spite of the holiday season, this talk is not, as someone suggested it might be, about how to get the best deals on Dharma gifts for your loved ones. I am a member of the Sangha here. I'm not a monastic or anything like that, or a teacher, so I let my hair grow out just a little bit so nobody would be confused about that. But I do think it's really important for us to support the Sangha and to contribute in different ways that we can. So when Howard invited me and prompted me to consider giving a talk, I was happy to do so. But this will be somewhat interactive. The reason why I'm here is to support the Sangha. But I would like it to be interactive. I sense there's a lot of wisdom in the room. We've known that from when other people have come up and given talks on Dharma duos. And I find that some of the best information comes forth when we are free to voice our own opinions and even disagree with one another. So as we go along, if you have something that you feel contributes, or you would like to clarify, or whatever, chime in. Interruption is freely encouraged, politely. So, in the spirit of that, I will challenge you to think and respond rather than just consume this talk, for entertainment value or such. And fair warning, I'll be asking if we can come up with maybe a definition of materialism before I launch into spiritual materialism. So in a couple of minutes, put that in the back of your head, see what it might mean to you, if there's something you could come up with. So I have to admit, the more I prepared for this talk, the deeper I had to examine my own inclinations to the Dharma, my own motivations, as opposed to other spiritual traditions that I've known. Because Buddhism can sometimes be a rather intellectual pursuit if we let it be, especially if you like lists and numbered lists and 8 different ways to examine everything. We can fall into that trap of really letting our mind wrap around everything, and it becomes an exercise, a mental exercise. So I'd like to suggest that as we go through this topic together, that we contemplate our motives collectively, individually, as we approach the Dharma, and that we're not here to correct one another, but really to just gain an understanding of how we come to our spiritual path. And as Jay mentioned in introducing this, there is a trap that we bring some of our materialistic pursuits and approaches and mindset to our spiritual path. So, and those material habits do affect our spiritual practice, I believe. So, what I propose is that our spiritual practice is affected in one or more ways by the materialistic society in which we live, and by the consumer mentality that we exercise almost daily. So that's something we'll think about, and my goal is to bring awareness to this fact and to suggest how we might address it. So let's begin. There's always a dictionary definition for everything, and some speakers start off with that, but I think it sort of stifles the creativity that we might have, or the different approaches that we have to things. So when I say the word materialism, what comes to mind for anyone?
Immediately what comes to mind for me is the getting into the objectness of things, as opposed to the connectedness that I have with everything that exists, which would be a sharing.
Okay. So a physical attachment as opposed to maybe a shared connection. Yes?
I think for me, the distinction is whether you covet material things. I think that's the quote-unquote sin of materialism, and that we're surrounded by material things, and they obviously give us comfort and meaning. Mm-hmm. So I don't think materials in and of themselves are a bad thing. I think it's the approach to them.
So our attachment,
again, maybe the attachment,
craving, sure.
I am suspicious of any words that end in ISM.
Good.
There's something, sinister about a system.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Food, clothing, housing, employment.
So necessities,
Yes.
in a sense, can be part of it. Okay, thank you. Yes, Clint.
Well, I think there's a philosophic term about focusing on surface, focusing on surfaces rather than interiors. And I think a more commonplace use is just a desire to acquire.
I like that. The desire to acquire. Yes?
When I think of materialism, I think of labels.
The
Right
isms.
car, right clothes,
Oh,
right
okay.
gym.
Sure. That's a good way to look at it, too. Errol?
I associate materialism with ego, like you mentioned earlier, the freeing of the ego. So again, it's that clinging into something.
Right. Yeah, that's definitely part of it, too. How the ego attaches to that. Thank you. Anything else? Yes.
I was just thinking about the association of materialism with money. craving for more than what is our basic need.
Yeah, that's part of it. Yes.
Yeah, on my spiritual journey, I've often thought of materialism as something negative, whether I pursued it, which I usually do. But in discovering Buddhism, not to be judgmental about it, but just, it's something. But I don't have to particularly label it as negative.
Thank you. Yeah, that's a good point. Just letting things arise and fall, even our cravings, even our mindsets. That's true. Yes, I'm glad we started off that way instead of the dictionary approach. That's all good. But if I do look at a more tangible definition from an authority, being a dictionary, there are two ways to look at it. One, which we've sort of echoed here, is an excessive regard for worldly or material concerns. And I think the key word being excessive, and that's when we get into the ism of it and the judgment around it. But then from just a strict standpoint, the other definition is the philosophical doctrine that physical matter is the only reality in the universe, and that everything else, thought, feeling, mind, and willpower, can be explained by physical laws. So, and that's probably more as a doctrine of the material world and putting aside any spiritual aspects. But what most of us tend to associate with it is the materialism of excessive want and desire and chasing after things. For example, shopping for wants versus needs, right, like you had mentioned. Desires versus necessities, right? So in our, I think maybe you would all agree that we live in a fairly materialistic society, would you not?
Yes.
Yeah, and this is a time of year when that is certainly highlighted everywhere we turn. You can't walk out of here and not start to see advertisements and promotions, and even the news is all about how terrible it is that people aren't going to be spending as much this year as they have in the past, right? I mean, it makes a big difference in the economy and everything around us. So we are pretty well conditioned to look out for our material concerns. We're highly trained consumers in our society, just by the nature of how we interact and what we shop for and everything else. So, what drives our excessive regard for material concerns? And I think the key word here is excessive. So, if you thought about that, we have our material needs, the basics that we need to get by on. What do you think drives our excessive wanting and craving for material things? What drives that? Yes?
Well, the problem with it in the private sector that through advertising wants people to feel that they have to have this, they have to have that. It seems to be a big drive, encourage that kind of consumerist, excessive consumerist attitude in people.
Right. So marketing makes us think that our wants are actually needs. Yes, Rob?
Status.
The need for status. Sure, we do attach status. Our ego attaches status to different things. You got to look at what labels on your shoes and your clothes and your car and all that.
Security.
Security?
Pleasure.
Okay. Yes.
I think it's also just trying to fill an emptiness inside that's ego-driven.
Right.
I was going to say pleasure. Just by attaining something, it'll give us some pleasure.
Okay. We think it will, and sometimes it does.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Yes.
I agree with Clint around emptiness, and I would connect it with a belief in an aggrandizement to meet that feeling of emptiness. So that more, it's always more. Wherever we get,
Right.
it's just a piece of reaching for more.
If this helped a little, 5 more will really get me there. Right? Yes?
We want to be happy.
We do want to be happy. And we believe, and we are told to believe, that material things will lead to that. Right?
But I think that the advertising also wants to create an empty feeling. That's the whole goal, is that you're only going to be happy with that thing for a short time. And then you want to replace it with something else. So it's an elusive happiness that you never really attain.
Right. Yes?
Yeah, I'm sort of echoing that. It's like you really want to be happy or satisfied, but it's short-term, happiness. I think of one ad I've seen over and over. It's Subaru. Subaru is love. That's in the magazine right there.
Yeah.
And I think that's just very telling, and I have a Subaru, actually.
And we love you.
But there's an emotional attachment to products that the advertising does. But I think there's something real inside too. But identifying with that car, but not that car. That's my personality. That's not. So I think there's emotional need being filled.
Right.
False.
I would say identity. I think that a lot of us identify with the things that we own. Oh, I am my clothes, I am my car, I am the place that I live, I am my neighborhood. And I think that that's exacerbated if people don't actually know who they are, who they really are. Then they look towards the outside world to help identify themselves.
Right. Or if we have a perception of who we are and we don't like it, we can put all this other stuff on top of it to tell the world we're something different. Better.
Sense of inadequacy.
Right. Yes.
Well, I'll go back to what was said about emptiness. It's not sort of a Buddhist emptiness, but an emptiness that comes from a lack of spiritualism, a lack of real community, and therefore to fill that, we shovel all the stuff in there trying to fill the void.
Right. Yeah, I would agree with all of that. I had intended to mention this later, but I'm I'm a marketer. I'm a copywriter, and most of my copy that I write, most of the writing that I do, is for marketing people in the service industry, to help them market their services. And a lot of times, the key to doing that is really finding out what is the problem that they're solving for someone. But of course, we run the risk of playing on people's fears, pumping up the problem, like really describe it well so they say, oh my God, yes, that's me, I'm in such pain. Ta-da, here we have the answer. And so when you mentioned some of the things that really drive us, just to give you an idea, the Bible, a good resource for people in my business is a book that is called Words That Sell. So I can flip to any, these are all tagged for different reasons I have. So, if we want to describe something as advanced, it's not just advanced or better. It's just released, just arriving, now available, fresh, sleek, new, shiny, factory sealed, fresh off the press, newly issued, brand new, mint condition. Modern, ultra-modern, futuristic, startling, revolutionary, breakthrough, groundbreaking, trailblazing, state-of-the-art, cutting-edge, high-tech, precision-engineered, etc.
Sounds like a George Carlin riff.
Almost, yeah. If it wasn't actually being used, it would be funny. But, so that is, this is what we're up against. This is what we come to. This is what we're steeped in when we come to our spiritual tradition. When we walk through that door into here, or when we sit, you can't just get rid of all of this. It's out there and it's affecting us. So that was about the driver, like what drives it. And I would say most of these are emotions around fear, pleasure, emptiness, craving, right? All of these. So there's these emotions that we bring to the material world, And then we have, the spiritual world that we get into, spiritual practice. And a lot of these are... I don't know if I brought this. Let me see. Well, there are certain... there are certain characteristics of the ego versus characteristics of the soul. And I say soul not in the Buddhist sense, but maybe our deep inner knowing, or when we center ourselves as opposed to let the ego run, the monkey mind go and run with things. So our ego, and we have probably lots of psychiatrists and psychologists here, so forgive me if I'm not following a specific tradition, but I think our ego wants us to be happy, to be right, to be comfortable, to avoid pain. It seeks situations where we feel better about ourselves, right? And these are the things that marketing plays upon. Versus characteristics of the soul or our inner knowing are simply that it wants us to be, to unfold, to express. What else? As far as ego needs versus soul needs, if you could compare the two, what would you say?
Be present.
Soul need would be to be present.
Yeah.
Right?
To feel interconnection.
Connectedness, yes.
Acceptance.
And I think that would probably be an ego need, right? Could be both.
Ego, I think of it as wanting things to be different, whereas your soul is the things as they are.
Oh, so accepting things as they are, not necessarily I need to be accepted by everybody.
Right.
Okay, sure.
Gratitude.
Whole, integrated soul.
Right. Unity. Great. So we get a sense of the difference between the ego and the soul, if we look at it that way. So, in a sense, I would just say it's, if we could sum it up, maybe it's doing versus being. Right? The ego wants to do and achieve and accomplish and be seen and all these things, whereas doing is more, or being is more what we're approaching on a spiritual path. And rather than talk about the soul, I would say we could probably call it our Buddha nature, or just arriving at what is. So, as we talk about spiritual materialism, it's really using the spiritual path for our ego pursuits, right? To satisfy the ego, but on a spiritual path. And I think we don't really have to look too far for examples of that. We can look at people in religious traditions who we can tell are pumping up their ego, and then they have a fall when it's revealed what they're really up to, things like that. So, what examples can we think of that might highlight someone using the spiritual path for their ego pursuits?
Ted Haggard.
Who?
Ted Haggard.
Okay. Which was?
He was situated in Colorado Springs. He was like one of the leading fundamentalist, I guess preachers would you call him. He had national influence. And he got caught up in a male prostitution scenario involved taking crystal meth and so on. And so he's drunk out of the whole thing. But for a while he was ranting against homosexuality and trying to cast witches out of the neighborhood and that kind of thing. So he was very much involved in the power and the money and trying to deal with the fear inside of himself and the self-loathing inside of himself by taking on all these outer spiritual champions.
Right.
Maybe turning around a little bit, I've been reading about the origins of AA. Bill Wilson had a very big ego, but he knew that the program which he and others were developing, a spiritual program, had to be protected from the ego, and so the concept of anonymity was that sort of antidote to the ego, and in more colloquial words, to avoid big shotism.
Right.
Because always there was this tendency to be the big shot.
Sure.
But anonymity would always counter that.
Right. Sure, anytime you're handed the microphone and given the stage, there's the opportunity for that. So, I think the same problem exists, the same risk exists in Buddhism, but perhaps it's more subtle. I've drawn from a couple of resources. One is a book called Cutting Through Spiritual Materialism by Chogyam Trungpa. And fair warning that like the first 20 pages are on spiritual materialism, and the rest of the book is all about the Four Noble Truths and how to find a teacher and everything else. So it's a great title, but it goes into a lot of other things. And to quote him, we can about spiritual materialism. We can deceive ourselves into thinking we are developing spiritually, when instead we are strengthening our egocentricity through spiritual techniques. This fundamental distortion may be referred to as spiritual materialism. And so he mentions, spiritual techniques. And on the spiritual path, if we call it that, he talks about eliminating the confusion that obscures the awakened state of mind. Right? Eliminating the confusion that obscures the awakened state of mind. That is the spiritual path. Which we could say might be moving towards shunyata, emptiness, nothingness, right? So you're taking away, you're eliminating confusion. And what it is not, in my understanding, is building up the awakened state of mind. Right? We're not creating something, it's actually the absence of ignorance. So it's not something that we construct and then risk having it all fall apart. Because if it's something that we achieve or acquire or put together, it can crumble as well. So it comes about, everything I've read, and you've probably seen some of this too, it talks about an awakening, a revelation, or the proverbial peeling away of layers to get down to something that already exists as opposed to something that we need to create. Because I have never heard, he used to be enlightened, but now he's not.
It was a passing stage.
It was he was that for a while, but now, somebody else has it. Now, I will say we can have moments of clarity. We can have moments of awareness without being fully enlightened. But that just means that our confusion and ignorance is only partially cleared away, right? Or that ignorance rears its ugly head again, to quote Sarah Palin. And so, these momentary glimpses that we have in Tibetan traditions, it speaks of 3 different ego traits. Okay? These are form, speech and intellect, and mind. So form, speech, and mind. And just real quickly, I can give you a rundown on these because I think that plays into what happens when we start to peel away the layers. Okay, so in form, the ego is concerned with pursuit of comfort, security, pleasure, and all those things we talked about. And the risk there, the problem, is in the attachment to these states. Okay? It's not that we want to have comfort or that comfort's bad or security is bad. It's when we're solely attached to that and we want nothing else to transpire but these good things, right? Things that we judge as being good. In the speech and intellect category, we get caught up in systems and identities and isms. Okay, nationalism, communism, Buddhism. And I often hesitate to call myself a Buddhist. I just say I'm studying the Dharma, or I follow the Dharma. But this creation of identity serves the ego. This is the ego wants to have an identity. It wants to attach to something. It wants to be seen as something more than it believes we might be on our own. And the risk is that, and I ran across this great term, speaking of isms, that I was thinking, that's perfect for my sister. She's a churchaholic. Because I hadn't really known what else to call her that I could say in public. But the risk is that we substitute new methods for the way we use the old system. So, bringing material approaches to Buddhism, like I've said. And then the third is the mind, where the ego is trying to maintain its own sense of self, its own existence, and it's resisting this achievement or this arriving at nothingness, right? Yeah, I think it's the ego that resists the emptiness that we approach in Buddhism. So we can have these momentary glimpses of the awakened state, like somebody mentioned. But I think the risk is that the ego mind interprets and judges that. So we might have this momentary revelation, this momentary awakened state, and the ego is going to view that as an accomplishment. Look what I did, look what I've done, let's repeat this. And rather than seeing it as just the absence of ignorance, the removal of something, it sees it as something that it has done, something that you have done. You've achieved something, so let's see how often we can recreate that. Let's do that every time, not just momentarily, not just periodically, not by chance. We want to take control of it. And I think, and the ego wants to take credit for it, I think the other part about that is that the ego wants to see everything in our life as having meaning and purpose and unfolding and as part of this grand scheme that makes us so great. Instead of just saying, there are periodic things that happen and everything arises and falls away. And sometimes it's good and sometimes it's bad. And actually all the time it's neither, because good and bad are just judgments. But does that sound like something your ego would be comfortable sitting with? Yes?
You said comment.
Yes, please.
As someone, raised in Christianity all one's life, and what you just finished describing, it just reminds me of what I grew up with and have lived with. That sense of purpose and meaning and all that, and yet, interestingly, maybe it's just, at this point in life, I see, this Buddhist way of approach, I find it much more helpful. Being freer and not as attached to that sort of precise Christian journey.
Thank you.
So,
right. Yes, Ray.
Yeah, I just want to say, Trump, the author of Cutting Through Spiritual Materialism, was himself accused of spiritual materialism, taking sexual advantage of members of his community. He had a problem with alcohol. One of the couple things that have come to mind is when someone achieves power, that can be a mind-altering experience.
Sure.
And it's a big component of that. The other thing I just want to say is that, in the small group section that we had a couple weeks ago, one of the guys in my group said, there's no such thing as enlightened beings. There are only enlightened actions. And I think it's pretty good, we can do things that are conscious and aware, but as for achieving perfection, I don't think that's an option.
That's a good point. So instead of I am enlightened, it is I have experienced enlightenment or have glimpses of it. Right? Yes, Dave?
I was thinking too that a lot of us
dimension of ego, rather than just achievement and inflating the self, can also be devaluing the self or feeling like you're not achieving anything. So a more collapsed state is just another dimension of ego.
Right.
And then I also think with the speech piece, it's also very compelling to make Buddha nature good and ego bad, when in fact I think the ego can be a very compelling and interesting portal. You know, it can be an interesting way to get to other places. So, you know, if you're sort of a non-dualist and think, well, ego is you can't separate spirituality from anything else, then it's just maybe a much more dense expression or a protection against some kind of vulnerability.
Right. So the view that maybe all parts of us are valid, not necessarily good and bad, but the different expressions of it can have different consequences.
Sort of a developmental perspective would be that you know, because we're so dependent as embodied beings when we're really little, that we get injured in ways that make us protect against that basic goodness. So I just think that's an important context.
Right.
It's the sort of the developmental embodied context.
Yeah, and the ego has some very good purposes, some very functions in protecting us and, you know, helping us meet our needs and everything else. So it's not necessarily bad. Right. Yes.
For me, specifically, I think one of the great traps for material spiritualism is humility. I strive so hard that I lose sight that, in fact, it's just another striving. It's just another attachment. It's like, oh my God, if I feel really humble, this must be it, reification. You know, this is it.
Yeah.
When in fact, you know, it's nothing more or less than everything else.
Right.
But I'm so driven.
Right. Yes, Clint.
Yeah, you know, words are tricky things, and they can be misinterpreted or take on significance that maybe wasn't intended. I did feel uncomfortable with your last statement. Maybe that's just my ego reacting. And maybe I'm paraphrasing you incorrectly. Might have to please jump in. But a statement like, you know, life doesn't simply have meaning, and that what was the other one?
Things arising and passing.
There's no good and bad. You know, I think, from what I understand, because I'm nowhere near that, you understand like a really enlightened. I mean, you really get it, and the ego's totally gone. I mean, I can see how that might be the case. But for us guys that striving down to lower levels, I think that it sounds almost kind of nihilistic. I mean, for me, my life does have a meaning, and it has a meaning of trying to like tap into the essence in a way that you know I haven't been able to before. Maybe that's striving. I would be. I'm not at a state where I can't say that I'm not striving. I mean, I'm obviously coming to form the practices and do other things because I want to be a happier, more connected person. So guilty as charged. And I do think that when you say there's no evil or no good, I feel uncomfortable with that statement too, because again, right, when you can eventually transcend duality, and that might be the case, but that statement could be really misinterpreted and abused by various people into doing horrific deeds under the rubric that you know, what some people think.
Sure.
So I
appreciate it.
But also, words are tricky, and it's kind of hard to like really make a point without having other possible interpretations be attached to.
Right. No, well, thank you. And words are tricky because rather than saying there's no good and evil, what I was attempting to communicate is that we tend to take an experience and judge it as being it's a good experience for me, it's a bad experience for me, instead of it's just an experience, you know. So I wouldn't disagree with you. And I will, you know, I have to say that something I still struggle with, and we hear this communicated at different times when we have different teachers come, is the question about, well, if there's no striving and, then what's the purpose of moving forward? How do we set goals in life if we're not supposed to be attached to an outcome and all this? So, and I'm not going to try and resolve that here today, but it's something that but it's something we hear over and over, and I think that's a core issue to wrestle with as we approach our, the path. So, but thank you for bringing that up. Yes.
I don't feel that our experiences are value neutral. I don't think that you can just say that all experiences are just experiences. To me, that's meaningless. I think what is more important is what I'm experiencing is, it's not value neutral. It's more of a question of how do I want to handle what I've been presented with. And it doesn't mean that it's good or bad or it doesn't have meaning. It's really a question of how do I want to handle it in my life. And it's not a question of good or bad. Yeah, it might be something bad. I go to the doctor and he tells me I have pancreatic cancer. It's not value neutral. The fact is, I could have this life-threatening illness and I might die in 6 months. I'm not going to pretend that it doesn't affect who I am. And I don't think it's like egotistical to feel kind of bad about the fact that I might not be around. I don't know. I don't think ego is a bad thing.
No, I would agree.
It's really a question of how you approach it.
Right. And I think you bring up a good point. It's how we respond, and what that brings us to.
And also one thing I think you're really ignoring is
what's that?
How people feel and value money. I think that's really the real. For me, you sort of like talking around that. It's sort of like, how do people deal with the money they have or they don't have or they wish they had, and how they use the money that they have in the world. And, I don't think necessarily money is a bad thing. It's really a question of, I don't think it's a bad thing for someone to want to have a fulfilling job and it's to have, a nice place to live. It's really a question of, sensible consumption and irresponsible consumption. And unfortunately, I think a lot of people have bought into the idea that they need lots of things to be happy. But I don't think it's, I happen to like the fact that I have a stable job, and I like the fact that I live in a nice house, but I'm not particularly materialistic. I just feel that they're basic needs that I deserve in order to be a happy person.
Sure.
I don't know. I'm not going to feel guilty about it.
I agree. I think that in some ways you can't fight the fact that we have egos. To sublimate it, I think, is really a problem. I think we are born with egos. I think it's genetic, just as I think selfishness is genetic and self-survival is genetic. And those are not bad or good things. They just are part of our genetic.
And they do serve a purpose. They do assist us in certain ways.
They had served great purpose for billions of years, actually.
Right. They've gotten us to where we are. They've helped us, live and survive.
Yes.
I
would agree. Yes.
Yeah, I think, of course we have egos, and I think what we're here to do is practice with the presence of our own mind and see how our ego comes up and reacts to like this very thing that's happening now. How is your ego jumping out and reacting to it? So I think it's just a matter of practicing the Dharma or the lessons that we have.
Right. Yes.
So for me personally, I try to look at experiences as neither good nor bad, as I think this a really short story would clarify. Once upon a time in the village, a long time ago, there was an old man had a horse. One day the horse ran away, and then all the villagers came to the old man and said, "Oh, this is so sad. Your horse ran away. This is really, really sad." And he said, "Well, my horse ran away, but let's see if this is a good thing or a bad thing." A week later, the horse comes back and brings with the horse a beautiful mirror. And all the villagers came back to the man and said, "Oh, you are so lucky. Now you've got 2 wonderful horses. This is perfect." And he responded in the same way, "Let's see if this is a good thing or a bad thing." The next day, his horse was training this mare and ended up breaking both of his legs by falling off the mare. And all the villagers came over and said, "Oh, this is so sad. How sad. Your only son has broken both of his legs. This is such a sad thing." And the old man looks at his son and says, "Well, the most important thing is that he's alive. But let's see if this is a good thing or a bad thing." And then finally, a war broke out in the country. And all of the young men in the village were sent out to war, except for one, the son of the old man. And all the villagers came and said, "Oh, this is so perfect. Your son doesn't have to go to war." And he didn't say anything at all. So for me, I tend to, I like to look at the world and say, well, let's see if this is a good thing or if this is a bad thing. And for me, it's actually very freeing.
Right. Thank you. And this is, I think that's an example of maybe what I was saying when we judge experiences as good or bad, and yet later we may change our mind, and that's what I mean. Thank you. That's a good way to look at it. Yeah, we've got a little bit of time left. Yes.
Yeah, I feel like we're going to take over your talk. Are you okay?
I'm okay. Well, yeah. No, I did. I welcome it.
How's the ego reacting to this?
You bring up a very good point, because as I was approaching this talk, there were 2 things going on. One is, will I have enough to talk about? Where will this go? I should open it up and, make sure we don't run out of time and everybody's tapping their fingers. But on the other hand, there was also this ego need to do really well, right? To perform, get up there. And so as I'm reading all this information and thinking about, when people get a stage, they do this and they do that, and, all this finger pointing that I see in the literature. The thought came to mind, Tom, you should really dare to give a bad talk. And see how you do with that. I mean, give such a bad talk that you can't show up for 2 weeks. Tell everybody you got the flu. Didn't get my flu shot, I've been out of commission, and all that stuff.
You wouldn't be the first.
What's that?
You wouldn't be the first.
And perhaps not the last.
Yeah. So, no, but you're right. So these things all tug at us, and I have no problem with having my talk diverted or, derail or whatever.
Oh, in that case, then I'd like to make a comment.
Yeah. By all means.
I think there's a cultural element to materialism and spiritual materialism and what happens with our ego. And particularly, I think in our culture, individualism is really important. And so we approach things from a very individualistic point of view, even our responsibility for our own spiritual development. And I think it affects, like, for example, the way I interact within this Sangha here, and in other things in my life that I have to take care of myself, before, instead of asking for help or looking for it in that way. And also the sort of, we've pretty much assimilated the ideas that big and more is better. And so, for me personally, I'm like, if I meditated more, I would have more of those moments. If I were, it's like I've got to be better, I've got to be more. Right. And I think our culture really teaches us that,
right.
On so many different levels.
You bring up a good point. And, there's just a couple points I want to make. Seeing as how, Jay, we've included the question and answer portion throughout.
Sure.
How much, do we have a couple minutes?
Yeah. We should probably try to wrap up in 5 minutes.
Okay. So these are good points that you bring up. And I would like to say, and to honor what's her name? Anthony, what you brought up about sort of, the money issue and all of that. There was a section here that I was planning to talk about, and that is our consumer mentality, which attaches more to the money. And just quickly running down these, I think we are, as professional shoppers or consumers in our society, there are 6 different traits in the consumer mindset that I think we embody and we have to look at as we approach our spiritual path. And they are that we want to be a smart shopper, right? We want to get the most for our money, the most for our time invested in meditating, in the Dharma, in studying. So we want to be economical, you know. We have a desire to be entertained, right? We want to go to the good speakers, not the ones who just drone on and on. We want to, we really want to show. We seek out variety. We want things to be exotic. I think maybe that's why sometimes people gravitate towards the Tibetan, the Tibetan practices, because they have all these cool bells and drums and hats and, all that kind of stuff, right? So, these are things, and I'm just saying we should look at these, like, what is our motivation? We want ease of access. We don't want to have to travel overseas and go to other countries and all that. We want it right here in the Bay Area. And, we're pretty spoiled, I think. You really don't have to look too far to find what you need. And we attach status to certain things. So, there's the celebrity of Dharma, or we want to be seen as being close to a famous or well-published Dharma teacher. We want to go on the trips with somebody who's well-known and have our photos taken. We want to hang out at the really cool retreat centers, right? And we want quality assurance, and this is where I want to wrap it up. As a consumer, we expect, a money-back guarantee almost, or at least some assurance that our time and effort won't be wasted. And I could show you ads from magazines that play on all that, but I think, here's what I want to conclude with. I don't think we can lay all of this at the foot of our Western, consumer culture materialism, because there was a guy who called himself the Buddha, and he spoke of 4 noble truths, one of which was the 3rd noble truth, stating that there is an end to suffering, that this is possible, and that a state of total equanimity can be reached called nirvana, which is a Sanskrit term which literally means extinguish, as in extinguishing the flames of desire and craving. And there was a promise in that. If he was a marketer, I'd say he was doing a pretty good job. All this pain and suffering, I have a way to make it go away. Right? So it's not just us. There is an inherent offer, I would say, within the 4 noble truths. And that's what attracts us to that. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that. But the trap is when we start thinking how we are going to accomplish and achieve this instead of reach a state where everything that is not what we're looking for is stripped away. So, I thank you for your attention.
And Tom, will you be willing to hang out for a while afterwards and answer all our questions on the
All of
Dharma?
them. Flog them. Sure.
Okay, now is the time for announcements. Are there any announcements?
You're the host.
I am the host. Due to these tough economic times, we've taken on multiple roles.
Were there layoffs?
Well, we haven't announced them officially, but so please enjoy the tea. The hosts have a script now. Please enjoy the tea and refreshments during our social hour afterwards. And if you do have tea, please wash your cup. There's a newcomer sign-up sheet if you'd like to receive the newsletter either in printed form or via email. Some members go to lunch after the meeting around 12:30. They meet by the doors if you're interested in that. And I'll be going around with a Dharma bowl to accept contributions to cover our expenses. The suggested donation is $5 to $8. So, would you like to do a dedication, Tom, or would you like me to do the standard?
I would defer.
Oh, there's another announcement?
Sure. Yeah, our speaker next week will be the one and only Diana Elrod. The Nichiren tradition. She's a kick. She's a lot of fun, a lot of energy, and Then open discussion will follow towards the end of December, and we have a cast of wonderful characters coming up in January.
Excellent. Thank you, Howard. Any other announcements? Okay, let's join hands.
By the power and truth of this practice, may all beings have happiness and the causes of happiness. May all be freed from sorrow and the causes of sorrow. May all never be separated from the sacred happiness which is without sorrow. And may all live in equanimity without too much attachment or too much aversion, and live believing in the equality of all that lives.
Thank you for listening to the Gay Buddhist Forum. If you would like to hear several new talks per month and be notified of upcoming speakers so you can participate live, please subscribe to this podcast, like us on Facebook, and join our mailing list by visiting gaybuddhist.org.